Hi folks, welcome to another little cybersecurity sketch note with me, Gavin Ashton. Today we're going to be talking about Solorigate / Sunburst. So this is the same attack, it just had different names attributed to it by different parties. In fact, everybody but Microsoft called it Sunburst, Microsoft called it Solorigate, so there you go. Now this broke over the festive period, but it's got a pretty long tail in it, so it might be interesting just to go through it here. Before I get going, I want to talk a little bit about identity and how we authenticate to cloud services. So I take our user here. Now, days gone by, you'd have Active Directory. That person would be represented by a user account here. And we'd access things like, we'd sign into our device and we'd access, applications hosted on premises, and maybe access, databases or, file shares, what have you. Things that are secured by Active Directory. And then over time, we started to get things like, applications hosted elsewhere. So maybe they'd be on hosted by partners or on the public internet, what have you. And we needed a way to access these systems. So the way that many organizations did this was through ADFS. So ADFS was really a method of enabling web-based authentication to applications. So in this case, our identity provider would be Active Directory. So we'd be hooked into Active Directory here. And then these applications would be called relying parties. And, ADFS provided that mechanism where these relying parties would be configured to say, if somebody from, let's call it the old Contoso, if somebody from Contoso tried to access our website, we'd know that we need to go and talk to ADFS over here. The person would provide their credentials, ADFS would check that, and boom, the person's signed into that website. And when the cloud came along, we've got this new thing called Azure ID. Now, what many organizations did was say, okay, well, Azure AD is just another one of these relying parties in essence. When you come along to, let's say, O365, again, I'll use my sort of funny, bad O365 logo there. So O365 always uses Azure AD for authentication. So you come to your little Office 365 portal here, you're entering your person at blah, blah, blah.com. Blah, blah, blah.com is pointing us back to our organization. So blah, blah, blah.com. And that authentication flow would happen through there. So O365 passes you back to Azure AD. Azure AD passes you back through to ADFS. ADFS authenticates you into AD, and in you go. Right. So that's in a very brief nutshell how we're authenticating to cloud services. And that wouldn't necessarily just be O365. That'd be whatever other sort of SaaS applications you've got up here. So SaaS app 1, SaaS app 2, etc. Any applications that are authenticated through Azure AD. So, Solorigate / Sunburst. What made this so interesting? I'm going to use a bit of a bigger picture here. So, AD obviously is integrated into all sorts of things. We've also got things like internal networks. That's my network sign. We've got our databases, got our apps, got our servers, clients, etc. All these things are things that we care about. And SolarWinds is just another one of these sort of examples of systems that say, we will secure all of the things. We'll have our little sort of management platform up here. So this box is something that we really care about because it's got access into all of the things, let's say. Typically they would say we want domain admin. Okay. And the minute you get domain admin, assuming you haven't done any sort of locking down of things, then domain admin is, basically as powerful as it gets, or even enterprise admin if you've got a forest. So a hugely privileged platform. Now, what makes this interesting is that in the case of, there's two interesting things. So the aspect of how the software was compromised, and obviously, we've got a supply chain based attack. So there's a software package that was compromised that gets downloaded into custom environments, and boom, we've got a compromised environment. So there's a supply chain element there, and that's a subject in of itself. Another aspect of this is, once SolarWinds was compromised, it wasn't necessarily information protected by Active Directory directly that was of interest. What the attackers were actually going for was where organizations were using ADFS to authenticate to the cloud. That was actually what they're after. So it was the resources that were protected by Azure AD. So whether that's, again, come back in here, or whether that's, Euro 365, my logo's gone bad here, there we go. O365, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, things like SQL Online, etc. Or, some other SaaS applications, all the data that we might be storing out in the cloud, right? That was actually the target. But the reason why it was so effective was because so many organizations use this service, SolarWinds. And think about across the planet, like how many organizations are using SolarWinds? This is my failed planet here. Hundreds, thousands, all across the States, Europe, Middle East and Asia, everywhere. So the effectiveness of this attack was phenomenal. And this is going to have a huge tail in it. So once the attackers have got in, they're then able to set up things like persistence so that they can continue their mission, start exfiltrating data. So, resources for this are, plentiful. So you can go to, starter.aka.ms/Solorigate. All kinds of detailed in-depth information here about what to do and where to look and so forth. And again, as I've said in other sessions, this reinforces this message is about being on the lookout for indicators of compromise. Have you got any logs that are indicating you've got people in the environment? We need to be looking for that stuff. Be aware of in this case in particular, it's a pretty well-known vector that the attack was coming in through. So people are going to be, having patch systems already. My assumption would be that's already in hand. But again, this is going back to the ADFS component here. The blast zones point I've made a few times over the past sort of year or so. This is really, and this is also reflected in the Microsoft Enterprise Admin model now, where ADFS allows you to authenticate to the cloud. Great, that's kind of what we want to do, but that's kind of where it stops. It doesn't protect you from more advanced threats, which we're now seeing in a sort of cloud-based world. So moving to an SSO-based model, if I start a new picture down here. So we've got Active Directory, we've got Azure Active Directory. We really want to treat these as isolated directories. By having ADFS here, the way that Solorigate actually worked was that we've got ADFS in the middle. There's a certificate in here that we care about, the token signing certificate. And it's actually that which, through SolarWinds, down through AD, they could grab this certificate and then they could forge tokens to sign into Azure ID with whatever credentials they wanted. So by removing ADFS, we're removing that threat vector. So enable Azure ID SSO with password hash sync. And that's going to protect you from attacks where Active Directory is the sort of attack vector into Azure AD. Azure AD's got all sorts of, funky protections to help with these kinds of things, as well as obviously, stealth-based capabilities in terms of protecting AD as well as Azure AD. So yeah, that's a brief rundown of SolarWinds. I hope you found it useful, and I'll be back again soon. Thanks.